Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us at the VegfestUK Brighton 2018 for our Sunday. Today we're going to have a panel on inclusivity within vegan spaces, and very happy to be joined by three colleagues here who will be on the panel. First of all, we have Shashi K, who is, well, many things, but one thing to do is a stall holder at VegFest, running Living Naturally soap nuts, isn't it? So that's so you've been part of VegFest for quite a long time, been vegan for a while, good decade on board. So Shashi K, our first panellist, very also happy to welcome Karin, who is known to many as well, VegFest, basically. VegFest, you know, the face of VegFest. So Karin has again been with us for a long time and been vegan around about 20 years. And our third guest here is Christopher-Sebastian. Again, has been coming to VegFest now for several years, brought a lot to the table. And on that note, I'd like to give you a big round of applause for all our panelists. Okay. With the best panels, we haven't really planned anything, so we're just going to chat a bit. There will be some options to ask a few questions later on. We started a little bit late, but we've got a good 40 minutes. Without further ado, I'll invite Shashi K to have a few words. Shashi.
Okay, so my name's Shashi. So I run a vegan skincare company, and we do lots of things, but when I started the company, one of the main things for us was that the main ingredient was, it was a fair trade ingredient. It was free of any oppression of any kind. People were being skilled, learning to how to do the skilled work. They were then able to take that elsewhere. We were ship freighting a lot. We looked at a lot of things in terms of ethics, not just about being, not testing on animals. And when we started the company, it was very important for us to talk about that as part of our key message. So part of what we do when we are out there, which I feel like a lot of businesses aren't doing in vegan spaces, we are just talking about, okay, well, it's good for the animals, but what about the rest of it? And also, we don't test on animals, but what about palm oil? What about other ingredients that we may use in the food things or the skincare things that we make that are then also contributing to oppression? So for me, it was looking at all of those things through the supply chain, and for me, in vegan spaces and vegan events at VegFest, other business holders do not do enough of this. So for me, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about why companies aren't looking at all of those things through their supply chain. It is so important. Like, we look to ourselves, and a lot of people in this room and a lot of people generally will be doing their own work about dealing with their own biases and working through what, like for me personally, I'm working through what I feel to be quite ableist attitudes that I have, and I have to do that work for myself, so I do. I feel like a lot of people in this room would also be doing some of that kind of work, but we need to be talking about that so that business owners, consumers can also start thinking about that kind of thing. So yeah, so that's
me next? Oh, okay. Oh, I wasn't ready.
You're always ready, don't give me that.
I'm Christopher-Sebastian, and yeah, like I've been vegan for 14 years, so like Karin is ahead of me, so well done.
Tim's ahead of me though.
Oh! But yeah, like I'd been vegan for 14 years, but like my road to vegan activism, if you will, occurred much later. Now I work for vegan publishers. I also am affiliated with Vine Sanctuary in the United States. I am the social media director for Peace Advocacy Network, which centers veganism and vegan outreach. And I also teach about speciesism at Columbia University. And like talking specifically about like, you know, my academic background and the work that I do at Columbia is about teaching a course in power, oppression, and privilege. And you know, and really teaching about like, you know, or teaching about the historical legacy of speciesism in modern society, how it had become codified as like, you know, as and normalized, and its impact on human societies, particularly on race and social class, and kind of like reversing the dominant narrative that veganism is itself elitist and classist, because my argument is that like that non-veganism actually is elitist and classist, because non-veganism is actually perpetuating these stereotypes, perpetuating systemic bigotry, which reinforces attitudes of racism and like and social discrimination, and you know, and it has a much larger impact on environmental racism, on gendered violence, on queer discrimination as well. So teaching and contextualizing speciesism as a legitimate type of anti-speciesism as a legitimate type of activism is really, really important. It's part of the work that I do. But what I also notice is that, like, in doing this, I get a lot of rejection of this message from the mainstream community because they feel like it's important to completely separate veganism and separate speciesism from other types of oppression. Which to me seems absurd because oppression never occurs in a bubble. It occurs, like, you know, and informs upon like other types of oppression, and trying to work to undo it, like, you know, from only one perspective or without including other perspectives seems like a fool's errand to me. And like, you know, and that is like, you know, that's the essence of, like, you know, of inclusivity for me, understanding that like different people, different activists have different perspectives on these issues, and like, you know, and broadening our understanding of their perspectives and being inclusive of their messages for like a holistic or an integrated type of justice is important for dismantling speciesism. So yeah, like that's, you know, that's the kind of work that I do, and like, you know, and it's incredible how deeply antagonistic people can be. I was just coming from like doing a talk about like Black VegFest that some of you were like watching, and like, you know, and the reaction to a Black VegFest or a Black vegan festival in New York City, like specifically targeting like, you know, communities of color that are underserved, like the reaction to that is like very, very telling, because people really, really were like viciously against this idea. And it's like, okay, so like which one is it? Are we supposed to be trying to make as many people vegan as possible? Or like, you know, or are you only arguing for veganism from one perspective, and that's the only valid perspective? And it's also really telling for me because, like, you know, people are speaking out of both sides of their mouth in a variety of ways. Like, you know, people borrow from, like, you know, from the legacies of like of human slavery, of chattel slavery all the time for our message. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. Like, you know, people borrow and talk about like the Holocaust, and like, you know, and use that as a proxy for the animal Holocaust. Again, I don't think that that's a bad thing. There are real historical connotations to that. Like, you know, the legacy of how concentration camps were formed is based primarily on like the legacies of slaughterhouses and of like animal violence. Like, you know, chattel slavery is deeply rooted in animality. I don't have a problem with that, but what it's really telling is that when white people talk about these things, when white people make these connections, it's accepted. But when Black people actually talk about like veganism as an affirming thing for Blackness, and when Black people do precisely the same things, we're being divisive. And that is the telling thing. And that is, like, you know, why it's so important for like people that are in this room to, like, you know, to spread the message about this kind of work and the importance of it and the necessity of it. So, thanks.
Oh, okay. How does one follow these two? Well, I'm just going to say a quickie because I have to. Well, for me, I went veggie first of all, vegan about 20 odd years, love it, never look back, learn something new about veganism every single day, and you realise when you meet people like this, you thought you knew stuff, and then it just gets deeper, and there's so much more to learn, and it's absolutely fantastic. For 20 years, I've been promoting veganism to the media. That seems to be my thing, talking to journalists. Even more so now, very blessed to work with Tim, who I adore to pieces, who has given me the space to really promote veganism for a very long time, because Tim and I have worked together for years, and to coach journalists to be vegan, and just to really, if you see the vegan message in the media, a lot of it is really to do with Tim, and I'm just the vessel to get it out there as such. Yeah, so love being vegan, and I just don't know what to say, and I don't want to cry because I've just put my makeup on, but how on earth can hearing about Black VegFest be negative, and to hear that people have actually said that? I really don't want to bloody cry. Don't make me cry. How can that be a negative? How can anyone say something like that? I just don't have words. I just want to know if I can get a cheap flight to New York. There you go.
Okay, thanks, folks. So, Shashi, let me ask you a little bit. Recently, you described some vegan spaces as basically toxic. You know, so speaking as a woman of colour, as a vegan woman of colour, how do you feel about the vegan spaces, especially in the UK that you enter? Tell us more what you feel about this.
I was asked recently, like, what is it that is a barrier for people of colour coming into a vegan space, and what can be the barriers? And a lot of times you see things like cultural appropriation, and thank you. My first time. So cultural appropriation is a big deal, and it's widespread, and it's, you see it everywhere. And so for a lot of people, I'm from Trinidad, and I had a conversation with a lady yesterday, and it's a very cultural thing that we look for our own people that cook a specific type of meal. The reason why we do that is because they have a relationship with the ingredients, relationship with the food, with the techniques, and it's a certain way to prepare the food. And other cultures may not have that connection. And not only do they not have the connection, but it is completely exploitative when you're just seeing a niche in the market and you're like, oh, you know what, we don't have vegan Mexican, let's do that in a really big way, without any kind of thought of the culture that you are then borrowing that cuisine from, that culture from. You know, I was having a conversation with a storeholder yesterday about she's not vegan, but she's thinking about becoming vegan. Her brand is completely vegan, and she wants to know how in such a space she can present herself. So I was saying, well, look and see what's most authentic to you. The thing that you're promoting is a cultural thing that you're promoting here. So look and see how you can help benefit the communities that has come from. So she took that on. She took that on in a really good way, a really positive way, and it's that kind of thing. And there's also the kind of visuals that you get from a lot of vegan events. So you get a face of veganism or a certain body of veganism that people might not connect with. You don't get to see somebody in a wheelchair at the front of a poster looking like, oh yeah, I'm a vegan. You get to see, no hating on Tim Sheaf, but you get to see a Tim Sheaf, like a really, you get to see healthy people. You get to, that kind of stereotype of healthy, able-bodied person. And what if you want to enter this space? What if you want to become vegan, but you think that it's not for you because that's the visual that you get? So it's things like that as well. There's other things that you see in terms of how you are viewed when you come into a space, and just because it's vegan and it's fair trade and it's organic, all of a sudden the price points are ridiculous, and it's a huge issue. So for us personally, we strive to keep, we strive to keep all of our price points super accessible, because one of the things that we found is that when we were creating a company and so we created our company because of various medical issues that our children had, and we had to seek ways to make them better because they were suffering from all kinds of things. And we figured out, okay, well, try gluten, try vegan, try gluten-free, and we tried loads of different things until certain things fit. And by going through that, we started our business. And then we figured out that in such a space, when you are looking for help for your children or for yourself, immediately, if there's a diagnosis attached to it or a medical, the prices jump up. So, oh, I need an eczema treatment, the price jumps up. It's really, really debilitating for people that don't have access to funds to deal with all of this. So for us personally, accessibility and pricing is a huge deal. So we keep everything low, margins low. You know, we want as many people as we can to experience what we're offering, and we don't want them to have to pay super extortionate amounts to do that. So yeah, it's those kinds of things that.
So just to put that also in a nutshell, so some of the solutions, and you mentioned like this sort of white veganism, you know, these vegan spaces are dominated by white males, and generally white cis het males, fully abled, fully bodied, looking very healthy and clean and wonderful. And you know, I would say we've as VegFest, we've started making, you know, for instance, like keynote speakers. I mean, would I be right in thinking? I mean, I think people of colour don't really trust white people to explain veganism to them. Once we've got people of colour we had, like, for instance, Dr. Milton Mills. Now, Dr. Milton Mills is there explaining to people about, you know, and I would say from looking at this and listening that really people of colour have a trust issue with white people. And there's an area of like, would we want to take on a new idea from people who we don't really trust, or a systemic culture that has oppressed us for generations? Therefore, having people of colour, keynote speakers is a real solution, I would suggest. Would you agree with that?
1,000,000%. So I've been to other events where, and I was talking about this yesterday, where we'll talk about different issues. So we'll talk about the impact on the environment. Palm oil might come up, different ways to recycle, to change your energy supply. These things will come up, but we don't really talk about environmental impact concerning people of colour and women specifically. So we're not talking about that, and that's a big deal. So if we're thinking about, well, when we're getting all these amazing fruits and vegetables for our amazing smoothies, well, who's picking that fruit and vegetable? Are they getting fair wages? What's their working conditions like? We don't think about that, and there's like amazing organisations that, like Christopher-Sebastian always talked about, food empowerment program, and raising the messages that these people talk about is super important. Dr. Milton Mills, the things he talks about, Brenda as well, who I love, like what she talks about with food deserts, and it's really important to talk about those things. And I've been on panels where that conversation was completely missing. And as a person of colour, you listen, and it's not that you don't trust, but you are looking for the deeper things in there. You're looking for things that you can resonate with, and those things don't come up. So that is a big deal. Yeah.
Okay, Sebastian, what's your view on this about basically making sure that people of colour feel welcome in spaces, vegan spaces especially? You know, what sort of solutions can we offer? Because there's clearly an issue that, you know, there's issues. That's why we're having the conversation. What can we do about it?
Yeah, like one of the things that like talking, there's a lot to say here. Like just talking about the accessibility of the vegan message for for people of color. I think that one of the things that VegFest has really been instrumental in doing is is amplifying the voices of people of color through panels like this, and and including us in in the speaker lineup again and again. And it's not just the prevalence of of people of color and us feeling included and feeling welcome, but in a dozen different ways, you raise the bar each time. And I really feel I really feel so glad to be a part of something like this. The fact that we actually have interpreters at this event for to be inclusive of people who like have hearing disabilities, I think is absolutely radical and revolutionary. The fact that like, yeah, these people are here and doing a remarkable job, and like, you know, and we don't even have to notice them because all of us get to listen, but like making this available for other people and including them is so important. And like, you know, and that is like, you know, and the feedback that you take to heart each time someone brings these like critiques to you, like that's part of the work. You know, that's part of the work that we do, actually listening, not becoming defensive when we hear like critiques or like, you know, the ways that like, you know, we have been faced with limitations in past events or in past spaces, but actively engaging with people when we hear that they don't feel that they have been adequately represented is important. Amplifying their voices by including them in the speaker lineup, including us in the speaker lineup, and also funding events like the Black Veg Fest is so revolutionary. Like to actually like, you know, put financial and economic support behind an event like that, and then stepping away and allowing people of color, allowing people from marginalized communities to raise their own voices and organize in their own spaces is absolutely remarkable. So yeah, like I view VegFest as a leader in that. I view VegFest as a leader in keeping like these spaces affordable, in creating accessibility for folks with disabilities, and like, you know, and really not backing down when confronted with like the critiques from people in the dominant society who like, you know, who are uncomfortable with these changes. And yeah, just to go back to something else that Shashi had said about like, you know, recognizing and kind of interrogating the images in mainstream circles that we're confronted with. And like, it doesn't take away from like, you know, the remarkable work that vegan athletes and like, you know, celebrity vegans do, who happen to be like, you know, the types of like men that Tim describes. And just in case anybody like, you know, is unaware, we throw around a lot of terminology when we talk about cis-het maleness, like we're talking about cisgender heterosexuality, like, you know, just like people who identify with the gender that they were born in, and like, you know, and who are heterosexual or who ascribe to heteronormativity. And a lot of us, like, you know, we say these things without necessarily recognizing like that there are people in the audience who might have no idea what we're talking about. But yeah, like, you know, these are the people that we look at as the leaders in the vegan community. And like, you know, and we don't necessarily recognize the people who laid the foundations for that, like that celebrity vegan culture, and who had put in the intellectual labor, the academic labor that like that supports the arguments that people use when they go up in front of the camera. And like, and it's the words of like Carol Adams coming out of the mouths of like, you know, of celebrity vegans when they're talking to mainstream audiences on TV or on the radio. It's the words of Patrice Jones and like, you know, and Angela Davis and Alice Walker, and you know, and like, how many times have we heard the quote that animals exist for their own reasons, just like, you know, like they don't exist for human reasons any more than black people exist for white people or women exist for men. I'm paraphrasing that quote. How many of us have heard that time and time again and divorce it from like the black author Alice Walker, who wrote The Color Purple? You know, those are important words that we use all the time, and we don't recognize where they come from. Those are the words of black women coming out of like the mouths of celebrity people, and like that have been normalized across channels like social media. And like, you know, and we detach these important messages. We detach like, you know, that knowledge and that academic broad base from like, you know, the people who have done the intellectual labor, who have created these words, and like, you know, and we just kind of let it exist out there in the space alone, or like, you know, we just like reattach it to primarily white people and oftentimes white men. And when we talk about inclusion, like I definitely want to talk about the fact that like, you know, this isn't limited to race. Again, I want to stress that like, you know, that the animal rights community is largely made up of women. and and the underrepresentation of women in mainstream spaces is really, really important. And the overrepresentation of men as our heroes and as our leaders is something that we should look at. Like whenever you see polls online conducted by mainstream organizations or in social media spaces, and polls that are asking who's your favorite vegan or who's the most important vegan influencer for you, you'll see a list of 10 names and 8 of them are guys. And it's wow, that does not reflect who's been doing the work in this movement for 30 plus years at all. And I'm that's absurd. And that needs to be talked about. That needs to be recognized. I had suggested that as part of this panel, we talk about the Me Too movement, and specifically the AR Me Too hashtag, meaning animal rights Me Too, that has been popularized by women in the United States. And when we talk about violence against women, oftentimes we're just talking about sexual violence, which that is important and that's relevant and we need to discuss that. But there's violence being done to women inside of our movement. Sometimes it is overtly sexual violence, but that violence occurs also through erasure and invisibilization. So, it's really important to honor and recognize those female voices and bring them forward and make them leaders in the same way that we have put men and maleness on a pedestal. So I said a lot, I don't know.
Sebastian, that's brilliant. You touched on something really important. We've got so many really amazing women in our movement, and yet we are still dominated by this sort of male thing. Karin, well, I was going to ask you, you work with a lot. You've helped so many really good women come through and helped elevate, and you get so many vegan women in the papers, and you've done so much for so many. We've got so many good women in our movement. So why aren't we seeing more women? What can we do to encourage this and change this?
That's a really good question, and I'd love to hear your answer. And yours as well, Tim. When I work with people who want to raise their profile, they want to raise their profile for their products, they run their own business, they want to get the message out there, I always say we're playing a game. We're playing the media game, and I know what the media wants, and we give it to them if you want the coverage. And 15 years ago, I was saying to clients, we're going to say that this is vegetarian, because this is 15 years ago, because I want to get you the coverage, and if we say it's vegan, you're not going to get the coverage. And I had to dumb it down, even though I feel sometimes I've got vegan tattooed on my head, and and that's what we did. But we chipped away over the years, and now no one is interested in vegetarianism. That you cannot say a product is vegetarian, it has to be vegan. And because I run Veggie Vision and got my radio show now, and which you were fantastic on Friday, and write for media, I get sent press releases. I'm inundated with this is vegan, this is vegan, this is vegan. I don't even know a vegetarian festival. It's all vegan festivals. So I think, coming back from that, is it something that we're recognising, and now things are changing? Now we are aware that, where are the more female speakers? Or, like the journey that I've seen over the years with the media, I don't know if it's a confidence thing as well, if the guys feel that they've got more confidence than women generally. I remember it was last year here at VegFest, and there was ladies in the audience saying to me, I really, really want to stand up. And I haven't got the confidence. Or how do I stand up? Where do I go? What do I do? I'm so passionate about veganism, and I just don't know what to do, how to get it out there. And then, yes, they do see the top polls, and they are the top guys, and they just think, well, the guys are doing it better. I don't know. I don't know if now, once we're more aware that there is a situation, that maybe this is the time for things to change. But as I say, I'm learning every day about veganism, and it's been more than 20 years for me. I don't know if that was of any help, but there you go. But yeah, I'd love to know what you think.
You know what, I will say that with, I think that what you're talking about, the confidence and knowing that you can stand up in a space and have your voice heard and make your point, like, yeah, it's part of that thing, knowing that there are other people like you or seeing people like you doing it. So for me, like what Sebastian was saying, like, if you are a vegan influencer, if you are a vegan celebrity, share your platform. It is really up to you to do your own work. Yeah, it is. You have to. It's up to you to do your own work, to figure out. I know it gets thrown around a lot, like, oh, just Google it yourself, do your own work, but you really do. Because if you don't do your own work, the paradigm shift that needs to occur within yourself to carry on doing the work won't happen. So you need to do your own work, and then once you're doing the work, no one's perfect. I already told you, I think I'm a huge ableist. I'm working on it, trust me. But it's like, you have to work through it, and it's so uncomfortable and it's painful, but you have to, because when you're out in the world, you notice once your eyes are open, you start seeing all the different types of oppression, and you feel really claustrophobic with it. And so the key thing is that celebrities or vegan influencers, even if you have a really tiny small platform, use it. That's what I would say. Huge platform, whatever it is, use your platform. For all the people that you read about, everybody that we talk about, that Christopher talks. I mean, I bought this book today because I love it. So you're in it, right? And I'm. Yeah, it's. I mean, look at all the things in there. I mean, this book is super amazing, and that's a good starting point, but don't stop there. So there are books by Dr. Breeze Harper, so Sister Vegan, another amazing book, and I love it. There's Aphorism by Afco, another like amazing one. One that I've just bought that I haven't read yet is by Sonora Taylor, Beasts of Burden. So start educating yourself with these things. There's loads of resources. Christopher-Sebastian talks about loads of things. There's food empowerment program, there's a well-fed world. There are people out there if you look. And when I started my journey like into veganism, you'd think I would have done it sooner because I've never actually eaten meat, and I was raised a vegetarian, and I was raised on a very strict Hindu vegetarian diet, so you feel like it would have happened sooner, but it just never did. And it was because I didn't see myself in the space, and it was just one of those things. It all of a sudden clicked for me. Actually, I watched the Gary Yourofsky video. It's like he who shall not be named, but him. So I watched that video, and it was literally, I was watching a lot of things, but it was that video. I went to bed, and literally the next morning I woke up vegan. And I can't explain what happened. It just did happen, and it was the right time for me. And then I searched out people like Christopher-Sebastian, and I searched out people to read and learn from. And then when you are doing that, also please support those people. Buy their books, support them. They have fundraising pages and things like that. Do that. And then once you've done that, then start, and you feel like in a place where you can start sharing, or you feel confident enough to talk about it, do that. Start community building. So I did that, and then we have a group in London called London Vegan Voices that we've set up, and there's a few of us. And listen, we're messy, but we are trying our very best, and we realize we've got a platform. It's a small one, but we're using it for what we can to amplify the voices. So we have somebody coming on from the Palestinian Animal League like next month, so that's amazing. Dr. Corey Wren was last month. Yeah, that was amazing. So, and we're trying to make it as accessible as we can. We're trying to get as many people that we can that want a platform. If you want a platform, we're here. We've created a space, and we just want to give it to people to talk about these things. So it's that. So you build with your community. So once you've had your paradigm shift, you build with your community, and then look for where else you can spread the message. And then more people will see themselves, they will feel like they can build their own things, create their own spaces. And when they are creating their own spaces, we have to be super supportive. So like you are. So you see somebody doing Black Veg Fest, yes, thank you, go ahead, do your thing, I'm here, I'm supporting you. So we have to be like that, because why wouldn't we? So yeah.
Okay. I see you mentioned Corey Lee Wren, actually. It reminded me how much I disliked Corey Lee Wren until I started listening and reading her. And now I just think it's amazing. Really, really interesting. I think one of these solutions here is just what you said. We have to get busy and do this. We have to share. I mean, I'm really heartened to see so many women of colour, vegan women of colour now being shared. When you go on Facebook and stuff, you see so many more. I think there's been an uptake in the last 6 months, and I think it's because people are stepping up and doing this. And when people step up, other people follow. One of the things you mentioned, Sebastian, was the pushback on Black Veg Fest that you've seen. Now, when we talked about Black Veg Fest on our pages, we got no pushback that I saw. We haven't seen any yet. And I think in part that's because we've been working with these areas, especially with yourself and our colleagues, and that sort of fragility has begun to sort of go, and people are beginning to get on board this now and see the benefits of it. So I think the work of sharing and supporting is really, really vital. We've talked a bit about people of colour, we talked about women. Just Sebastian, you identify as a queer man. So how do you feel about, do you feel vegan spaces are welcoming for queer, LGBTQ plus community members?
I feel like this one is. It's really funny that that we're talking about queerness now, because in the presentation that I was just doing, and I had to stop because I was running out of time. I had just come up on a slide of the discussions that that people were having, and the attitudes that a lot of people have about not just blackness in veganism, but also the rejection of queerness in veganism, which I was well, that's even more interesting. I know that oftentimes it's easy to get discouraged about people's negative attitudes and the bigotry that you face. But for me, my response is oftentimes to intellectualize it, because I'm deeply fascinated by people who have these intensely anti-black and and anti-queer attitudes. So yeah, I see the rejection of queerness and veganism. And I see people oftentimes, and I know that we have to wrap up soon, so I'm just gonna say this quick. No, I get deeply disappointed in that, because these people are wow, we have a lot more people over here, and I'm just my back is turned to them. And I'm deeply disappointed in that, because these are, again, I said this before, but these are our allies in animal rights. And they don't understand the harm that they're doing, not just to humans, but also the harm that they do to animals, because they don't recognize that, that homo antagonism is itself a product of speciesism, and how deeply it relates to speciesism. Because if you're antagonistic toward queer persons and toward queer liberation, you're completely erasing the breadth of how queerness presents throughout other animal communities. You're completely erasing the scope of same-sex attraction and same-sex activity that other animals have. You're completely erasing the depth of gender presentation throughout the animal communities that has been thoroughly documented. And there are books that talk about this. There are scientists who talk about this. One of the books that I talk about in the classroom is called Evolution's Rainbow, which is written by Dr. Joan Roughgarden, and she teaches at Stanford University, and it's a remarkable book. And so you see these attitudes from people in the mainstream community, and let's be real, these are not fringe attitudes. This is pretty normal. You see it all the time if you're a queer person, although you may not if you identify as straight. And yeah, it doesn't, they say largely, oh, this is a harm to animals. Please don't look at these queer people advocating for animals. Like, you know, this is like, you know, you're harming animal rights. Like, I'm considered an enemy of the state just for literally existing in this body as a black person and as a queer person. And like, you know, and I am somehow harming the animal rights community by my mere existence and by talking about animal rights because I don't present the correct way. And I argue that the reverse is true. No, you're doing a disservice to animals because you're erasing important aspects of their identities by trying to erase queerness and pretend that it doesn't exist. Think about all of the animals who are forcibly impregnated, whose families are torn apart, who, like, you know, who are victims of sexual violence. This, like, erasure of queerness is sexual violence, and you contribute to that deeply. So I urge people to think about that and, like, you know, and reimagine their positions to be more inclusive.
Okay, folks, we're just about out of time now. Just to say that this is going to be on film. We're going to release the film probably in about 3 weeks. We're going to try and ensure that it's subtitled too, so that people can follow all over the world. We'd ask you to share the film and these issues. We'll post it on our page, so there'll be an opportunity to have some further discussion and debate. You're also welcome to ask questions. I think all our panellists here will be, so you know, we're all on the VegFest page, so we can pick this up again further in 3 weeks on the VegFest page. So we're going to wrap up now. Before we do, I'm just going to ask each of our panellists, and I'll start with Sebastian because he's never short of a word. So I'll let Karin and Shashi just to, you know, have a chance to think. But basically, I'm just going to ask all three of you to really, you know, in less than 1 minute, give some advice about what you think, really, especially for people who are listening, who are in the vegan community, who are taking this on board, who are perhaps in positions of responsibility, might be a little bit nervous, but perhaps overwhelmed about tackling these areas, perhaps don't even understand them all. What's your best advice, in a nutshell, for people in vegan spaces to work towards being more inclusive?
I am short of words right now. I think that it's worthwhile for all of us to actually take a step back and, like I said before, one of the most important things that we can do is to listen when people like confront us with their concerns, with their grievances, and internalize the words that they're saying rather than immediately respond with a defensive reaction, which I do. Which, like, I respond defensively all the time. This is not easy work. It's incredibly difficult. We don't like to think of ourselves as bad people. We don't like to think of ourselves as perpetuating any type of bigotry. And yet we do. Like, we do it all the time. And, you know, and this is, like, you know, this is one of the fundamental, like, issues that we face when talking about animal rights. People don't like to think about themselves as contributing to any type of bigotry or violence or discrimination. But we do. We just don't understand it as such because we don't understand what that looks like in our food choices, in our, like, you know, cosmetic choices, in, like, you know, in this invisible exploitation every day. Extend that theory, extend that understanding to our human counterparts as well, and do the work of trying to, like, understand your own internalized biases every chance you get. And there's no finish line for this. This is a lifetime thing. You don't wake up one day and say, well, that's it, you know, I'm not racist anymore. We probably are. I'm going to be speciesist until I die because I've been born into a culture that, like, has taught me from birth to exploit animals. And so it's a constant process of unlearning that, like, that culture that I've been indoctrinated into. And again, the same thing applies to all types of bigotry. So do that. That was probably a minute and a half. Sorry.
No, don't be silly. Oh God, how do I follow that? Yeah. Oh God, I mean, when I used to run my campaigning group in Essex before social media, so we worked really hard, you know, I trained people to do school talks, and I had somebody say to me, I'm just so frightened, and I want to talk, but I'm just so frightened. And then somebody said, but imagine how that pig feels before it goes to slaughter. That pig is also really, really frightened. And they just sort of clicked and said, I can do it, I'm going to do it. I'm not as frightened as the animals are as they go into slaughter. And that gave them something to just empower them, to just think, I can do it. I don't know if stepping out of your comfort zone a little bit, inch by inch, I feel us four are probably stepping out of our comfort zone, even sitting here in front of you gorgeous people, and on camera as well. I just think we've got to admit that we don't know it all, and there's so much more to learn. Thank you for nodding and smiling, and thank you. I think don't be ashamed that it can be the healthiest way to eat, because a lot of people are saying, I don't care if it's really unhealthy, I'm just doing it for the animals. And I kind of feel like, get over yourself, it's for the planet, and show the same compassion to the planet, to people, to everybody that you do to that particular animal. But I think, yeah, just do some research and just believe in yourself, whether it may be some personal development work as well, which we can all benefit from. Yeah, just be open-minded and grow and do the best you can. And if you are not addressing the problem, then you are making the problem worse. I don't know, sorry.
The only thing I would say, I read this thing on this website called resilience.org, and it was an interview with a meteorologist called Eric Holthouse, and he describes, he works in climate change, and he describes something called a pre-traumatic stress disorder, which is you are aware of the things that you need to do to make the situation better, but then your actions don't seem to be leveling up to what needs to change. And so what you do causes any little thing that you do, because of what it is, it might be a small thing or whatever it is, it's you in denial until you're raising your game, until you're doing better, until you're striving to do the next, like the bigger thing to equal the destruction or equal whatever it is that you're trying to fix. And whilst we're doing all these actions, when we're trying to do the best we can, eat healthily, look at the environment, look at energy supplies, all this kind of stuff, to help the planet, to help animals, it just feels like it's such a little bit compared to the huge systemic problem that there is that we need to work on. So fatigue is real, and you need to take care of yourself. You need to know it's going to be hard, and you need to just keep going, because anything else will not help the animals. If you are not working through your own discomfort and your own fragility and supporting Black VegFest, and if you're not supporting other marginalized communities, then what animals are you working for? You have to, because otherwise you're not really working for the animals. You are really only centering yourself at the end of the day. So fatigue is real, work through it, take your time for self-care, but really understand that you have to put in the work, because the systemic oppression goes way back. It's really deep, and we need to work really hard to get over that. So, yeah.
As a white male, I would advise any white males, if you do have trouble getting your head around some of this stuff, shut up, listen. If you have trouble shutting up, I would advise a roll of gaffer tape is very useful. So on that note, I'd like to say big thanks for all of us here, and thank you to the audience. There will be a chance to talk to our panellists, so I'll just ask you to go outside the room, as we're a little bit late. We're going to just turn around very quickly for our next speaker. Would you please, big round of applause for our panellists. Thank you for listening. Thank you very much. Big thank you too for our BSL interpreters. Thanks so much. Well done.